Video games and movies are two of the most successful types of entertainment out there. But for some strange reason, video game to film adaptations, and vice versa, are pretty awful and honestly just terrible to watch.
Are you boys new here in town?
Lady, we're looking for somebody and we're from Brooklyn.
You're watching Gamerbrain, and today we're counting down the top 10 worst movies based on video games. And before we get into this video, if you like our content, remember to leave a thumbs up down below, and if you're new to the channel, then remember to hit that subscribe button. Number 10. Pixels. While technically not the worst video game movie ever made, as far as recent films go, this one tops the list of the worst. While this film stars Adam Sandler, Kevin James, and Peter Dinklage of Game of Thrones fame, not even that can save this film. The movie revolves around Adam Sandler, who plays Sam Brenner, a home theater systems installer who was once a championship-level gamer. Did I bore you yet with that plot? Basically, the film is an hour and a half of video game characters wreaking havoc through a city, which on paper sounds cool, but it fails at pretty much everything from its forced humor, horrible stereotypes of gamers, and lackluster action scenes, and they all make this film just awful. If you watch it, you'll find that it's worse than even you thought that it would be. Number 9. Alone in the Dark. This 2005 film, based on the game series of the same name, was made by Uwe Boll. Need I say more? He's a horrible director that has made some of what many consider the worst films of all time. Alone in the Dark stars Christian Slater and Tara Reid, among many others, but this film borrows very little from the game series that it's based on, and is considered by many to be one of the worst films ever made. It literally has a 1-star rating on IMDb, and is a movie that I wouldn't even make my worst enemy watch. Number 8. Doom. So, the Doom series is pretty badass, huh? So you'd think a feature film would be pretty cool as well, right? Well, wrong. This 2005 film, starring The Rock, messes up the format that everyone loved from the games in so many ways. The movie doesn't have the gates of hell like in the game, but instead an artificially made chromosome that literally turns you into a monster. But get this, the chromosome only turns you into a monster if you're evil. Evil? Yeah, you heard that right. The movie tries to replicate the FPS style of the games throughout, but honestly, even having a big name like The Rock and trying to replicate the game in some way couldn't save this movie. This movie is honestly probably a film that should have never been made. Number 7. Wing Commander. Anyone remember the PC classic Wing Commander? Well, whether you do or you don't, you may not remember the 1999 film adaptation. While this movie is unique in that it isn't another video game movie that was made by Hollywood, this one was actually made by its creator. Chris Roberts created the Wing Commander series in early 1990, and 10 years later, Roberts made his Hollywood debut by creating a Wing Commander film in 1999. The movie is boring, overly dramatic, and a total science fiction cliché. The film stars Freddie Prinze Jr. and Matthew Lillard at the height of the times when they were teen heartthrobs, but when you consider that the actual Wing Commander games had Mark Hamill, as in Luke Skywalker, starring in the live-action cutscenes within it, the movies really just look stale, and they're not fun to watch at all. But if you're looking for a good sci-fi movie, there is far better options out there, and this one really isn't a necessary watch. Number 6. Street Fighter the Movie. When Street Fighter 2 hit the arcade scene in the early 1990s, it blew up seemingly overnight. So why not cash in on that success with a rushed, poorly written movie? Although this movie does have some big names in it, such as Jean-Claude Van Damme as the ever-so-American Guile, and is also credited as the final role for the wonderful Raul Julia, most of the characters are basically unrecognizable versions of their counterparts within the game, and honestly, I've literally seen better cosplays of the characters represented here. It doesn't help that this movie is trying to be a big-budget action film that turns out looking like a poorly made college film. If you're a fan of the series, you might want to skip over this one unless you love cheesy films. Number 5. Max Payne. The Max Payne series of video games was definitely unique and is still one of my favorite third-person shooters to this day. The first game in the series was definitely revolutionary at the time of its release in 2001, But the 2008 transition of the series onto the big screen doesn't capture anything that makes the series great. Starring Mark Wahlberg, this movie tries to capture the look of a classic film noir, but it honestly just looks like a washed out eyesore of a film. The movie also utilizes ridiculously slow and drawn out action scenes in an attempt to simulate the in-game combat of the Max Payne series. Max Payne is definitely far from being the worst video game movie ever put out, and it's still watchable, but this one cracks the list for being a poor attempt at trying to emulate the success of the Max Payne video game franchise. Number 4. House of the Dead. Remember playing House of the Dead back in the day? The zombie-filled light gun shooter was pretty awesome, but the film adaptation, not so much. House of the Dead earned a terrible rating of 2 out of 10 stars on IMDb, and not only that, but it was named one of the worst films of the 2000s. Somehow this movie managed to make back its budget at the box office, but it might have the worst storyline of any movie on this list. Without spelling it out too much for you guys, basically the film revolves around the people who attend an island rave, all of which who are attacked by zombies, and those who manage to survive must escape. Look, the zombies I can live with, but a daytime rave on an island with about 20 people in attendance, not to mention the embarrassing and unbearable acting and abysmal filmmaking overall, I just can't let this one slide past the list, and it needed to be featured here. Number 3. Double Dragon the movie. Look, the Double Dragon series has a pretty simple premise. Save your girlfriend from bad guys without dying. Pretty simple concept, but let's be honest. Fighting game movie adaptations are almost all bad, and the words worst and movie pretty much go hand in hand with any of them. This movie was simply a cash-in on the kung fu movie craze of the early 1990s, and tried to appeal to every kid who took a karate class. What's funny about this movie is it doesn't really follow the game's plot well, and is totally weighed down by bad acting and an awful plot. Featuring Scott Wolf and Mark Dacascos, I know, I haven't heard of them either, but they play Bimmy and Jimmy, and they set out to battle their enemies in New Angeles. Yeah, it's lame, and the only redeeming factor this movie has is that we have the Terminator 2's Robert Patrick absolutely kill it as the villain Kogu Shaku. This movie was pretty popular in South America, but it pretty much came out and then faded away everywhere else. Number 2. Super Mario Bros. The movie. No, unlike every other list out there, this movie isn't gonna fall to number 1. As the first big budget Hollywood film to be based on a video game, I can't fault Super Mario Bros. The movie too much, but with that being said, it did set the path for the trash-filled catalog of video game movies. Bob Hoskins and John Leguizamo are featured here as Mario and Luigi, who are obviously two plumbers living in Brooklyn. They somehow find themselves in a universe where humans have evolved from dinosaurs instead of primates, which is a dystopian world led by Bowser, played by Dennis Hopper. Yeah, you heard that right, Dennis freaking Hopper plays Bowser in this movie. And if that all sounds terrible to you, that's probably because it is. And as you guessed, seeing two actors that barely resemble the characters they're supposed to adventure around didn't really take off well with kids or fans of the games, and ultimately, the movie bombed in theaters. You won't find a list without this one, and for good reason, because it was actually so bad that Bob Hoskins and John Leguizamo actually admitted to having to be drunk before they started shooting scenes. Number 1. Street Fighter: The Legend of Chunli. So, what do you have to do in order to be considered the worst video game movie ever made? Well, it's not an easy task, but this 2009 Street Fighter adaptation makes a damn good effort. Where do I even start with this one? Basically, someone decided that it would be a good idea to make a movie explaining the background story of Chun-Li, who has obviously become a series favorite, but I just can't see players of the games wishing that they knew the backstory of the character. But alas, Chun-Li is played by Christian Kruk, who in case you didn't know is not Japanese, and I guess the filmmakers just really didn't care. Honestly, every part of this movie is bad, from the script, the casting decisions, the action scenes, and the representation of the series. When I think of a Street Fighter movie, I think of Ryu kicking some... Oh, wait, I never even thought of a Street Fighter movie because to me, the very idea of turning a one-on-one fighting game into a movie makes zero sense. This is one of the worst video game movies out there, and please guys, don't watch it.